This Marina Life with MDL Marinas.
Hello and welcome to This Marina Life with me, Ceri Hurford-Jones and MDL Marinas. The question for today's episode is how can current and future boat owners make their boating more environmentally friendly? For this episode I met up with 5 really fascinating guests. Josh Masters from Lightning Craft, Kate Fortnam, the RYA's Green Blue Campaign Manager, Charlie Hall from Pixii Boats and David Kendall from Optima Projects. Let's start with Josh Masters from Lightning Craft. Josh has sailed all his life on the east coast of the UK in anything that floats. He studied as a marine engineer but had a bit of an epiphany when upside down on a boat trying to fix an engine. He suddenly realised that the environment is shifting towards electric and asked himself how many more big diesels would he be working on in the future. He now runs a business that is at the cutting edge of developing electric propulsion. I asked Josh, where do boat owners start on their greener boating journey?
I think what can people do is probably just to start with to educate themselves on their own existence in the industry, in the zone of sailing, of boating in general, and then start to understand what their options are from products, ultimately from businesses like us. So I feel like it's about providing solutions for people so that they can continue what they're doing, but in a less impactful way. And that's to say where we come in. And one of our real goals is to try and keep it cost effective, because nothing quite talks as loud as that. And I think it's a big ask for people to if you suddenly were to turn around and say, well, you can't do this because it's damaging. I don't believe you can take that away from people. I think you've only got to be able to lead them forward in a direction that's achievable. A cost point is a big factor, I think, when it comes to that.
That often is the deciding factor, because we can talk about batteries, we can talk about the alternatives in terms of the propulsion, and battery technology is coming along leaps and bounds. And in many ways, that's going to be quite a deciding factor, isn't it?
I think so, yeah. I mean, again, I'd like to think it's not going to be the deciding factor, because I tend to think of it differently. But yes, you're right, it is. However, I would like to remind people of the other C word that's not carbon, I suppose you could say, COVID. We're sort of leaving that in the dust now, which is quite nice. But if we cast our minds back, people were forced to stay inside and not go and do the things they've always done and work from home. And what we saw in that is a huge surge in people going outside and discovering outdoor spaces, nature again. Actually, that I can walk there instead of drive. And that's a sort of forced hand in helping the customer or the marine user to see that there's other ways of doing things. So yes, your point of batteries are the limiting factor. I think actually it's people's minds are the limiting factor. They need to see, and as I said, so COVID forced that upon people. They forced them to look at alternative things to do and places to go, because they couldn't jump in the car and drive over there. And they discovered things on their doorstep that they never knew were there. So I think if there's a way in which people can slowly begin to lift their head up and see what's around them, other ways of doing things, other than, say, putting an engine on and motoring back, perhaps it was, well, actually, we didn't get that far because there was no wind in the first place. So you haven't got as far to come home after the weekend of sailing. And it's a pace of life as well, I think. People have got to appreciate that convenience is costly. And if you want things done now, then it costs. And it's the same as if you want to get there now by putting the engine on, it costs. So as I said, I'm a sailor, and I believe that actually one of the extreme ends, but if you just sail without an engine, you don't have the option to put the engine on and go places. So you really think about where you can go and what you can do. So I know that's an potentially extreme approach to it, but I think if people were to understand that, then I think they could perhaps accept that, yes, your battery is not going to take you as far as your tank of diesel, but actually it's still going to allow you to do 90%, 95% of what you wanted to do anyway. So that then unlocks the door to a lower emissions and alternative approach to sailing and updating, I suppose you could say, updating the industry.
It's interesting. There's a couple of points there. One is, of course, we're almost going back in time to go forward, back to when boats didn't have engines and it was all under sail. And the other thing is interesting is when we're talking here about the practical alternatives, that it's actually real. What your business is offering and what other businesses like yours are offering, it seems to me, are are starting to become apparent are genuinely real alternatives, so that, you know, take our boat. You're talking to us today on our 35-foot sailing boat with the usual lump in the back. That lump can come out, you can get in there a decent propulsion unit and the batteries all in the same space, can't you?
Exactly, yeah. I mean, as I don't know if I mentioned it, but that's basically what we do. We solve the problem that is, how do you update the existing equipment, the existing technology. So one of the things we've done and are working all the time on is, how can you make it as easy as possible to remove an old propulsion unit and fit a new one. So that's down to widths of mounts being the same, overall dimensions being smaller, so they're not limited by, you know, if your engine fitted in there, then the electric motor will, and little features like that. So yeah, it's about solving the problem so that it is available and it exists. And the other thing we try and pride ourselves on is, so we're a UK based company and we design and manufacture what we can here, and we're here. So if there's a problem and you phone up, you'll speak to myself or a colleague, and we'll sort it out. So I think there's a lot to be said by customer service, and because it helps break through the fear factor of new technology, which always takes long time to kind of break down. And I think, given the rapid pace of change and the rapid pace of that you know, governing bodies in this country, the rapid pace of change that they want, they're asking a lot of an industry to change in terms of timeframes. And the environment asks it as well to get onto that topic. You know, it's the change is needed now, and unless we do something about it, no one will change, because there's no option out there for them to change.
Let's now hear from Kate Fortnam, the RYA's Green Blue campaign manager. Kate manages not only the Environmental Awareness Programme for the Royal Yachting Association, but also for British Marine. Its primary aim is to raise awareness of how boat users, clubs, centres and businesses can be more environmentally friendly. The issues that most boaters face on a daily basis is, how can they make their boating greener, and what sort of issues they face when they try and mitigate their impact on the environment.
Yeah, so we cover a wide variety of different environmental issues and ways that boaters can help have a positive impact on our environment. Some of the key topic areas that we're focusing on at the moment is decarbonisation of vessels. So that's in line with reducing carbon emissions to help tackle climate change. We're also looking at anti-fouling and trying to reduce the water pollution around that, and discovering new innovative technologies to support boat users in choosing a more sustainable option. We're also looking at waste, especially around end of life of vessels, because we've got a lot of our boats now coming to the end of their life, and what can we do with them in terms of recycling, and do we have enough facilities to enable that to happen? In terms of challenges, I think there's a lot of the simple things that boaters can still do that will have a big impact. And every time I go and speak to boaters at clubs, centres or in the community, I always say there's these very small things that we can do in terms of our behaviour when we're out on the water that will have a big impact. There are other areas which will require possibly a little bit more time, a bit more budget to enable to happen. And it's about making this balance between, yes, we're not going to be able to do absolutely everything straight away, but we can start putting in these small changes. And what we're trying to do is go and talk to the boating industry and find out what solutions are available and how can we make it practical and affordable for boat users to adopt these going forwards.
Then it was the turn of Charlie Hall from Pixii Boats, and I asked him, why should boat owners consider alternatives to fossil fuels?
I think we're at a bit of a crescendo with regard to moving from different energy for propelling vessels. I know we've got wind for sails, but all the other pieces of the puzzle need to be updated as well. And as we all know, unfortunately, fossil fuels pollute. The internal combustion engine, for all of its amazing things that it does, and I'm very impressed with it, is quite a dirty thing to get your hands around when you have to come and maintain it. And then also, unfortunately, getting this stuff out of the ground is getting more costly as time goes by, so it's always going to be costing more with regard to fuel. So I think that fossil fuels and the internal combustion engine is a bit of as I'd like to think of it, as a bit of a sunset asset, as in they're going to get less popular as time goes by in the next 10, 20 years. And the other issue that we need to start considering as well is regulations. You can see what's going on in the automotive industry with regard to being able to sell internal combustion engines. By 2030 are going to be banned. And I can see that the sounds that are being made in the marine industry. So when you go to ports or marinas, they're going to start, I believe, banning internal combustion engines. And I think they're doing that in Monaco already. So it's not all doom and gloom. I'm not trying to, paint an awful picture. But electrification is a different way of doing things. We can have zero pollution if you get your energy from renewable sources. And I've got some interesting progress on the supercharging of our vessels and where they're going to be kept. Electric vessels typically have about 90% less maintenance costs compared to conventional combustion engines. Typically, all you need to do is keep your vessel clean, and for our Pixies at least, maintain the impeller, because we've got a jet drive system that we're using on ours. And that's pretty much it. Everything else, there's only one other moving part, which is the motor. Everything else is sealed away. You don't have to touch it. You don't have to worry about it. It'll keep on going. And so, lots less to go wrong. And that's quite important when you're out on the water, especially out in the sea, knowing that you've got confidence in the boat that you're in and keeping yourself, your family or friends safe.
Yes. And it is about that practicality, because it's all very well having this vision and the desire, and also there's the cost implications to come into this. But it is about the practicalities. So tell me more about the supercharge element you were just mentioning there.
We're envisaging upgrading because luckily marinas have got lots of electricity running around them anyway. So it's upgrading their energy system so we can supercharge our vessels. So rather than taking between 5 to 8 hours to do a full charge on a standard household plug, you're talking more like 20 minutes. 20 to 40 minutes or so. And so we're working with them so that all the major marinas will be interfacing with these superchargers, and that sort of removes a hell of a big problem with electricity or electric companies about getting rid of range anxiety. If you know that whatever marina you go to, that you've got a supercharger waiting and you can charge it very quickly and enjoy your day at the marina you're at, and then know you can get back home. That's absolutely really important as a factor for changing over to electric. And then Savvy Navi, who I'm a great big fan of, and I use them for sailing as well. We're working with them to develop our range finding for our electric vessels, so we get rid of any range fear or range anxiety. Because they're so brilliant in calculating what the currents and winds are doing, you can find that if you're going into the wind and the currents, that you may not meet or might not be able to get to that harbour that you're hoping to get to. So you may need to turn around. So it just removes that anxiety of, you're halfway through Lyme Bay or something and you're not going to get quite to Weymouth, for example. You know where to go. You don't have to get halfway and then find out you're stuck. So getting rid of these problems is really paramount for us, and obviously communicating them to the wider public so that they know that these problems are being dealt with.
Finally, I got to talk to David Kendall, an aeronautical engineer by training, who has more recently been designing all sorts of composite structures. Boats have been a big part of his life, from wind farm boats to military boats and hovercraft, from foiling to race boats and even America Cup projects. His company, Optima Projects Ltd, have a very big story to tell.
What we can provide green technologies that will also do what you want to do in a boat, so you don't have to be in that absolute niche part of the market to be interested in the green technologies now. And a little bit like an electric car, you may be paying a bit of a premium to have that option, but then your running costs will be between 5 and 10% of the cost of running a petrol or diesel boat, and the difference is huge. So particularly helpful for boats that are used a lot, be that privately or in boat clubs or commercial applications where they're clocking up a lot of hours, then the payback in terms of saving of running costs is phenomenal. And we've seen increases in fuel costs, obviously that sort of swung it even further in our favour.
The issue is going to be, and it is the same at sea as it is on land, where the heck do you go to get the thing charged up? Because let's face it, we're struggling on land, let alone at sea, to get that sorted.
It's interesting because everyone thinks we're sort of 10 years behind the car industry in terms of electrification, which we are in terms of rollout of product. In terms of infrastructure, it's almost the reverse. We don't have charging infrastructure for cars. That's all being built and currently installed, and it's desperately trying to catch up with the growth of EVs on the road. I think the take-up of EVs has probably been faster than anybody realised, for good reason, and the infrastructure is desperately trying to play catch-up. With boats, it's a little bit different. If your boat is in a harbour or marina, 99.9% of those already have an electricity supply, and the boat will charge from a standard 16 amp supply. It will charge from anything. It has an intelligent shore connection which will detect what it's plugged into. So you plug it into a 16 amp supply, it won't overload it. You plug it into a 32 amp supply, then it will double the charge rate. So it's very intelligent, very well sort of controlled. It would be nice for the marinas to push at those general shore supplies up to 32 amps, which isn't such a big ask. We're already seeing, particularly in some of the MDL marinas, roll out of DC superchargers from people like Aqua Superpower. They exist in quite a few of the marinas already.
You talk about a 100-mile range in your blurb. Is that a target or is that a minimum?
100 is very realistic. Flat water, no wind, 200. In theory, the boat will do 200 miles at displacement speeds of sort of 7 knots. And we've got to be really careful when we do talk about range, because you need to have reserves, you need to have safety margins, as you would with petrol or diesel. You normally keep sort of 20% reserve when you talk about range. So we need some level playing fields really of how we talk about range, because there is a great temptation to say, oh, my boat can do 30 miles, 40 miles, which it may do, flat calm, no waves, no wind, and then you go somewhere for lunch and you find you can't come back because the wind's picked up. And that's why we really developed the boat to have a very long range. In theory it's 200 miles, so that we have all those safety margins. We also don't have to completely deplete the batteries, which isn't good for the battery health. You generally want to operate the batteries between sort of 20% and 80%, as you should with a car. But I've talked to other EV owners who don't realise this, and they're charging their car up to 100%. It's not healthy. You can do it when you need to, but you don't want to be doing it all the time. So we really developed the boat to have this very large range of 200 miles. Sure, not many people are going to be doing 200-mile trips in one go, but it means we could very safely go, from the Solent to Cherbourg, or Channel Islands, or Monaco over to Corsica, or from Mallorca to mainland Spain. Those sort of journeys, which are just not an option at the moment with electric boats. If you think there are limitations, come and talk to us, because you may well find out that there's not. Be that charging or range or comfort or anything else.
Thanks to all the guests who took part in this episode, talking about how current and future boat owners could make their boating more environmentally friendly. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it gave you some insights and inspiration to make your boating more environmentally friendly. I know it did me. Links to the various speakers are on the podcast notes. Please do take the opportunity to continue your own exploration. I'll be back soon with more episodes of This Marina Life with MDL Marinas. Thanks for listening.